really strong. So this one is his stomach. If this was a smaller oyster, he'd approach it the exact same way. He would wrap around his prey, and they just, like this muscle, he's gonna just pop it open, and as soon as it's open a little bit, he's gonna turn his stomach inside out, and he can actually inject his stomach into the mussel or the oyster.
Oh,
So if you look really closely right there, his stomach's actually inside of the mussel right there, that little clear.
How do you know when the oyster's dead? Is it open?
Yeah,
the
so
shell
they'll
is
open up. So this is a good example. So this one is just a shell now, but then this one that's closed and solid still has an oyster in it. And so when we're in the cooler, I don't know if there's a good example of it, but what happens is there's two different sounds. So when the oysters have water in them like this, like these are two live oysters, it sounds like you hit a stud because they're not hollow. But then if you hit just a shell, it sounds like it's hollow. So when we're in the cooler, it's really scientific. We'll be sitting there counting to 12, 1,600 times, all hitting oysters like this, and keep going with it. And so what happens is, because all of those starfish, they start out microscopic, but in all of our trays, because with our gear being in the water all year long, like the starfish that were born this year are now about this size. And so this still won't be a problem, but our oysters stop growing in the winter, but these guys keep growing. So by the time, like this time next year, the starfish would be big enough, they'd be about this size, and they'd be big enough to start eating, especially like smaller oysters, like the seed oysters. They'd be big enough to really start eating all of those oysters.
What is that?
So that's gonna be another starfish, that little gray guy. But then this guy right here is a sea cucumber. So they're a naturally occurring byproduct, and they're more of a good naturally occurring byproduct, because I like these guys because there's a really good market for them actually. So sea cucumbers, like this guy, are worth $6 or $7 a pound right now. And there's a really big commercial diving market for them, but we actually have a permit to grow them in our trays. And they're a natural byproduct to oyster farming because they're all attracted here because they eat oyster poop. So it's perfect for us because they clean our cages and they're just naturally attracted to the farm anyway. The only problem is I've been trying to grow these guys, and it's really hard to grow to keep something like this in a cage if it doesn't want to be in a cage, because it's like a water balloon. Most of this is going to be water right now, so they can squirm out of anything. So I haven't found a small enough screen where we can actually keep them in there. But this winter, once I have a little bit more time, I'm going to figure out how to actually keep them in there and keep them alive.
Is that just a rock?
Yeah, there should be some eels in here too, some gunnels, but I haven't seen any. And so all of those sea cucumbers, everything in our trays, because all this was just pulled out of one of our trays like a couple days ago, and they all start out and they're all about this size. So the sea cucumbers, all the starfish, all the urchins, they all start out microscopic. So that's why we go through that tumbling process, is we're just washing everything we can out of all of our oysters. And so it's a constant process, because for oysters, it's really awesome that the water is so clean here, because oysters mimic, it's a lot like wine. Their flavor profile mimics where they're grown. So for us, we have some really good tasting oysters because they're all cold water and the water here is so rich. But then the downside of that is that everything grows really, really well here. So there's a lot of other growth that also ends up in our trays. So this is something that I thought was really cool. So this is a bull kelp that I put in here a couple days ago, and you can see all of these bite marks. So that was actually the sea urchins.
Oh, wow.
So the sea urchins, they naturally eat algae and bull kelp, and so that's why we put them back in our trays, because they'll go through and they'll clean up all the algae that would block off all of our trays. And for oysters, you just want nice clear stacks so they can get water that moves through them. But all the urchins have been making a meal out of this bull kelp that I put in here.
Can the starfish not eat the sea urchins?
No, so they do, but so the urchins, it's weird. Urchins are a little bit faster. So if you watch them, it doesn't really look, it's not that exciting when you watch it in real time, but if you put it on and you speed it up a little bit, the urchins can actually crawl away just a little bit faster than the starfish. You'll see like herds of urchins just moving around the starfish and the starfish running through.
Right. Like they're herding them.
It is pretty crazy how fast these starfish can actually turn over, because this one right here, you can see all of its little arms that are reaching out to pull itself over, and they do a sit-up and grab onto the rock again. But one of the big reasons why we have to take mussels out is because the mussels, that's what they'll do, is they'll do stuff like this. And so at one point when these oysters were growing, there was a mussel or a couple mussels that were sitting in here, and it pulled all the oysters so tight that the calcium from the shell all fused together. And it's really hard to sell an oyster that looks like this, or one that has a rock stuck to it like this that we can pull out. So that's another big reason why we have to get the mussels out, just to make sure all of our oysters look good. It's when we were growing bull kelp, we were actually growing it over